Okay, so our topic today that we're going to be covering, which starts on page 2, is titled Christian Graffiti. And we're also going to be using the page 5 in your packet, which is going to talk about some of the early symbols of Christianity. So in this unit that we've been doing, we've been talking about who do you say that Jesus is. One of the things that we're going to talk about is how did early Christians visualize and symbolize their belief in Jesus. And many of these symbols have lived on today into our modern day traditions of the church. Okay? But that first article that we're going to look at is called Christian Graffiti. Now, does everyone know what graffiti is? Everyone knows what graffiti is? All right, it's a type of art. I don't know if any of you have ever done graffiti. Okay? There's appropriate graffiti, and then there's inappropriate graffiti. So, you know, it is an art form. That's not to say that you should be going down to the rail yard and spray painting boxcars like you see on the trains when they pass by, or to do any other kind of graffiti on public property. But some people like to just kind of do a collage of what we call graffiti. So this article is going to talk about Christian graffiti in the early church. Okay, so let's go ahead. If somebody could read that first paragraph, and then I have several questions I'm going to ask you. So it says early Christian art. We're going to talk about early Christian art. So Jordan, if you could read that paragraph for us.
Sure. Early Christian art, known sometimes as Paleo-Christian, refers to artistic images that were created and found in homes and catacombs of Christians in the first few centuries of the These included paintings, sculptures, and inscriptions that used various Christian words. One of the most common types were graffiti. These were less formal types of etchings of names and symbols of Jesus that showed the followers' belief in the Savior.
Okay, all right. So we're going to talk about the earliest type of artistic images that have been found that represent Christian beliefs. Now, our first question is that phrase Paleo-Christian? Okay? Does anyone know what the prefix paleo means? It's a Greek prefix. Paleo. See, Sawyer?
Doesn't it mean like early?
Well, in a way, yeah. It means old, okay? As in like the Paleolithic era is like the old Stone Age, okay? So when you see that word paleo, you tend to think of very, very, very early. Like almost in some cases, the Stone Age. Now in this case, we're not talking about prehistoric times. We're talking about 2,000 years ago. But we're talking about the earliest times of Christianity, okay? And this article is going to be about what some of the earliest kind of art was. All right? Now, these are images that appeared on the walls of homes of Christians, and it also mentions catacombs. Does anyone know what catacombs were? Often yeah, you've probably heard of it before, especially in connection with early Christianity. See, Jordan?
They're like tunnels and like
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
they're like kind of like tunnels.
Okay, yeah, they are kind of like a tunnel, all right, because they're underground. They're subterranean, as we would say. Okay, so that's a good start there. They are underground. Tommy, what else?
Usually they like connect up to the church, and I think like bodies are buried there.
Yeah, they're places of burial. They're places of burial. You know, in the ancient world, in cities where they didn't have a lot of land for people to be buried, they would often create these underground tunnels, like Jordan had said, and this is where people were buried. And the larger the city, the deeper and the more extensive the catacombs were. So in the early centuries of Christianity, where Christians lived in some of the big cities of the Roman Empire, that is where they buried their loved ones. Okay, and catacombs also tended to become places of worship. So some of the earliest images of Christian symbolism have appeared either on the walls of their homes or actually in the catacombs. Okay, and a lot of these are in the form of what we would call graffiti. Now, I know today people think of maybe graffiti being done with like a can of spray paint, but technically graffiti is something that is scratched or etched into the side of a surface. Okay, so if you're talking about like a stone wall or a stone of a catacomb, the side of a catacomb, they would scratch these images into the sides of those. All right. Okay, so let's take a look at what were some of the earliest images that appear as graffiti. It says in the next paragraph, interestingly, images from the 1st and 2nd century rarely depict crucifixion or resurrection of Jesus. So I think one of the most common symbols that we think of today, of course, would be a cross or crucifixion or some kind of image of Jesus. But the history seems to show that at least in the early decades and even centuries, you didn't see a lot of images of Jesus or even crosses. We'll talk more about that here a little bit later. In fact, it says many of the artistic images were abstract and very symbolic. So they weren't so obvious, okay? Like you see an image of Jesus on the cross, you know exactly what that's showing. If you look in the article here, some of the images that appear would make you kind of say, well, what? How is that a Christian image? All right, but these were the most common in the very early years. So let's take a look at the first one that you see in the article there. What's the first drawing that you see? And they're labeled. See, Andrew?
Dolphin.
So you see the image of a dolphin. And indeed, there have been many cases where they have found graffiti etchings into the sides of homes or in catacombs that show the image of a jumping dolphin. Okay, so why a dolphin? Well, back in ancient culture, the dolphin was a mythological animal. In addition to being obviously a real creature, a mammal, in I think it was Greek mythology, the dolphin was the animal that would guide the spirit of a departed person to the afterlife. It would lead them to where their spirit was needing to go. And if you know, dolphins are pretty incredible creatures, and we think of them as being very closely connected to humans. In fact, there are cases of dolphins helping humans when they're at distress in the sea. So the image of the dolphin was kind of an indirect way of saying the Christian had hope in an afterlife, and that the dolphin would guide them to where they needed to be. All right, so very early symbol of Christianity. All right, what's the next symbol you see there, which represents Paleo-Christian art? This one's a little bit different. See, Graham?
Peacock.
So you see the image of a peacock, not as easy to draw as a dolphin, and probably you would say, well, what's a peacock have to do with Christianity? I mean, usually when I think of a peacock, I think of a proud, creature. But the peacock is also a very beautiful creature, with its feathers fanned out like you see there. So that was a common feature as well, maybe kind of representing, resurrection and and beauty. And then the third image that you see there, which is a very, very common symbol, see, Gabby?
An anchor.
Is an anchor, okay? And the anchor is definitely one of the most common symbols of the early church. Now, when you see an anchor, how do you associate that maybe with Christianity? What does the anchor maybe make you think of? See, Tommy?
Kind of like when Jesus said he would make Peter his rock.
Yeah, because an anchor, it holds you in place, right? It gives you a strong foundation, like, Peter being the rock of the church, okay? It holds you in place. And indeed, that's kind of what the anchor symbolizes, okay? What else?
I was thinking maybe that it was showing that, Jesus was the anchor of the Christian.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that thing that grounds them. So yeah, that's a great idea. So yeah, the anchor was a very common feature. If you look up here on the screen, this is actually a photograph of a piece of stone that was, in essence, the headstone to a tomb. And if you look, it has some Greek lettering, which I'm not going to try to interpret that, but at least some of it. And then it has two fish, which we're going to talk about here a little bit later, and then it has an anchor. So indeed, there's a great example of the anchor being used as a Christian symbol. Okay, yes?
It has the same letter on it.
Yeah, in fact, those first few letters is the Greek word for fish. And we're going to talk about the fish symbol a little bit later on. Okay? All right, so those are a little bit unusual. But the next one we're going to look at, down at the bottom, is a even more bizarre example of graffiti. Okay? And this is referred to as, I'm going to pull the image up, and you have it on your paper also. This is called, I'm going to pull it all up there, the Alexamenos graffito. Okay, a little technicality there. Graffito is one image of a sketching of art. Graffiti is plural. Okay, so we're going to take a look at just one almost infamous example, I guess, of Christian art. So this is called the Alexamenos graffito. And it says in your article there, it says one of the more unusual examples of early Christian graffiti is an image sketched into the plaster wall of an imperial school on the Palatine Hill in Rome. So this was actually found on the wall of an ancient building in the city of Rome. It was discovered in 1857 after being lost to history for a long time. And this is the name that they've given to it, the Alexamenos Graffito. And what it shows you, and you can see on this side a photograph of the actual sketching, and then this is an artist's rendition of what it actually looked like, so you can see the details a little bit better. And it shows a young man standing before what is seemingly a crucified person with a donkey's head. And the text below it reads, Alexamenos worships his God. Okay, so if you look at it, I know it's kind of messy, but it's got some Latin, these are Latin letters here, and it's got this guy here, which, when I look at that side image, and it almost looks like Donald Trump. I don't know, it's kind of weird, but anyway, it shows this person here, and then it shows here this cross, and there's obviously a crucified person, but their head has been replaced with the head of a donkey, okay? And the translation of the writing there is Alexamenos worships his God, okay? Now, let's interpret this, all right? Whoever sketched this, they were not worried about the neatness or the artistic quality of it. It was really kind of like what graffiti sometimes is. It's just there, but it's trying to communicate a message. So when you look at this image, what do you think this person was trying to communicate by sketching this on the wall of the school? See, Tommy?
He probably wasn't a Christian.
Yeah, it sounds like this person was not a Christian. He doesn't seem to be very sympathetic or being very friendly to Alexamenos, who I think is the person being shown in the drawing there. Okay, he worships his God, who is the body of this person, obviously on a cross. Okay, you can see almost the wounds on his body, but it's got the head of a donkey. So this is very mocking. Whoever sketched this was trying to make fun of Alexamenos and the fact that he believes and worships a God who was crucified, which back in those days would have been considered the most humiliating of things for a person. The idea that you would worship someone who died a criminal's death, he's obviously trying to mock him. Okay? So again, it's got kind of a harsh imagery there, but this ironically is one of the earliest and oldest examples that we have of a crucifixion in art. Okay? Now, obviously, and it says if this is supposed to be Jesus, the person that's got the donkey's head, I guess we would interpret that this person is trying to mock Alexamenos. Yes?
Was Greek writing kind of similar to English?
Some of the letters, well, actually, English, our language, our alphabet is the Latin alphabet. The Greek alphabet, which we're going to take a look at here a little bit later, does have some letters that resemble ours. But technically, we use the Latin alphabet. And this being in Rome, those are Latin letters. Okay? All right. So that's a very early image of Christianity. Okay? All right. We're going to go to page 5 now in your packet. And we're going to take a look at some other symbols that began to appear over the course of time. Okay? Again, this image here would have been from about the year 100 to as late as the year 200. Okay, so on page 5 at the very top, you can see there are some images that we're going to talk about. Some of these you've probably seen before, and maybe you've never even thought about what they actually mean, but we're going to lay that out. Again, these are what we refer to as Christograms. Okay, they're images that all represent Christ. All right. So the first one we're going to take a look at are those two letters, okay, which are located right here, and it says on your paper they are the Alpha and the Omega. Okay, how many of you have seen these letters before paired together? Okay, many of you have. Again, if you go into church or if you go into a place of prayer, a lot of times either on stained glass windows or maybe on a banner, you'll see these letters. Okay, they have a significant meaning. All right. Does anyone know the significance of these Alpha and Omega letters? I know it says it on your paper. That's what they are. They're Alpha and Omega. But does anyone know more specifically what they are? See, Alex?
Alpha's like a leader of like a group.
It can be, yeah, like the alpha of the wolf pack,
Yeah.
okay, or alpha male, all right. So yeah. What else, Riley?
The letters in the Greek alphabet.
They are letters in the Greek alphabet, yeah. And to be a little more specific,
I am just kind of guessing.
okay,
with the-
guess.
So I was thinking maybe that like it's symbolizing that Jesus was the savior and like creator of the world.
Okay, all right, that's actually a pretty good guess there, okay? They are not only letters of the Greek alphabet, but they're the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet, all right? The alpha, which does look like a letter A, just like ours, is the first letter of the Greek alphabet, and then the omega, which is this letter, is the last letter of their alphabet. Now, we don't have an omega, all right? We have a letter Z. They have a zeta, but their last letter actually is what's called an omega. So, Sawyer, to your point, this idea that Christ is the creator, so he was like in the very beginning, and then he's always in existence, right? In fact, in the book of Revelation, which of course is the last book of the New Testament, everyone knows that now, it actually says, I am the Lord. I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord. All right? I am the beginning, and I am the end. So this became a very, very common symbol to represent Jesus and his eternal nature. Okay? And these became very prominent by the 2nd and 3rd century. All right, so on your paper, you see that little rectangular box there underneath it? If you go ahead and put that they are the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. Okay? They are the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. And again, you go into a church, you'll see them all the time. All right? Next time you see them, you'll say, okay, Christ is the beginning and the end. I actually have a banner in my classroom down the hallway, which I hope to see someday here, sooner rather than later, and it has the Alpha and the Omega on it. Okay. All right, let's take a look at two other Greek letters, all right, which are over here on the left-hand side, and this is the key and the rho, okay, the key and the rho. And you might want to maybe add on yours, because you have a picture of it, you might want to put key and then rho, just like here. Now, when you look at these two letters, and I'm sure you've probably seen these as well, okay, I know when you look at them, they look like a letter P and a letter X. But actually, they are both Greek letters, and one is called, the one that looks like an X is the key, and then the one that looks like a letter P is actually a rho. And in the Greek alphabet, the key would be like a CH, and then their rho is actually like an R. Okay, so the key and the rho are the abbreviation for Christ. Okay? And the key and the rho, this was a symbol that really became common a little bit later. You can see by the 4th century, this became a very common Christogram. So it'd be like, well, if you don't want to spell out the name Christ, you have these two letters that establish that. And when you see it, you know exactly what it means. All right? There's no ambiguity at all. You see the key and the rho, you know that it's a Christian symbol. Okay? And I'll mention that again here a little bit when we get to the 4th and final symbol. But the next one I want to look at is this one right here. Okay, and that's obviously the outer image of a fish. How many of you have seen that before? Okay, most definitely. Again, many of these are still common symbols today. So it should be pointed out that the fish was indeed an early Christian symbol. Okay, now typically when I ask people about this symbol and say, well, why is it an appropriate symbol? A lot of times people will say, well, Jesus told his apostles that he would make them fishers of men. And we know that several of his closest apostles actually were fishermen. And we know there are stories about Jesus multiplying bread and fish for large crowds of people. So you would kind of think that the fish would be a very obvious symbol of Jesus. And indeed, those all are truths. However, this fish symbol has an even deeper meaning. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share with you what this actually is. It actually represents an acrostic. Does anyone know what an acrostic is? Maybe you've been asked to create one before, like in literature class. Maybe. Anyone know what an acrostic is? See, Morgan?
When you spell out a word on the side and you have to put that word.
Yeah, like you might create a word and then the first letter of each of that word is like at the beginning of a sentence, or maybe it's a separate word. So yeah, I'm sure all of you have created those or seen those before. So the fish is actually a Greek acrostic for the phrase, Jesus Christ, Son and Savior. Now the actual letters, and Andrew, you were pointing out this earlier, are right there next to the picture of that fish. That is the Greek word for a fish. But if you take the first letter of that word fish and translate it, it would be Jesus Christ, Son and Savior. So the fish became kind of a shorthand symbol for that entire title. So as a Christian, you could write out Jesus Christ, our Son and Savior, or you could just draw a fish, and it means the same thing. So it became a very, very common symbol for Christians. Tommy, question?
So, like, a lot of these are Greek, so
Yeah, a lot of Greek letters.
were the Greeks, like, some of the first people to accept?
Okay, well, actually, eventually they did. But actually, the reason why we see so much Greek is because the early apostles and people like Paul used Greek because it was the most common language of the ancient world. And they wanted to use a language that more people knew than anything else. So that's why you see that. In fact, the New Testament was originally written in Greek, okay, even though some of the earliest Christians were Jewish. All right, so great question there. Okay, one more thing I want to mention about the fish symbol here, and I'm going to preface this by pointing out that this is a legend. Okay, I wish I could say that it definitely was 100% historical truth, but we don't know if this was really true or not. But supposedly, there were stories about how early Christians used the fish symbol as kind of a almost like a secret handshake. Okay, and I'll explain what I mean. There was a legend that Christians who would encounter someone they didn't know would often, like maybe take a stick and they would draw in the dirt that line right there. And then they would give the stick to the person who they didn't know with the expectation that one of two things would happen. They would either complete the fish, okay, like that, and then the person would be like, oh, fellow brother Christian, okay, and then they could talk freely with them. Or if the person was like, why'd you give me the stick? They're like, oh, I don't know. I just thought I'd give you a stick, all right? Have a nice day. See ya. So it was a way to kind of make sure to see if somebody was a Christian or not. Because, again, there were times when being a Christian was a dangerous thing. But again, that's a legend. We don't know if that really happened. I kind of think it very well could have. Okay? In fact, you could probably do that with a lot of these symbols. But that's the legend that goes on with that. But the fish very gradually became a common symbol. And I think even today, you ever pulled up behind someone at a traffic light, how many times have you seen the fish image on their bumper? Okay, very, very popular. Or it's a magnet on a refrigerator. So it's a great symbol, and it still does work today. But that's kind of where it originated. Okay. All right, the last one we're going to take a look at is this one right here, and this is a sunburst. Okay, and it's got actually 3 Latin letters. Okay, an I, an H, and an S. It has a cross on it. Okay, which is interesting that we finally see an actual cross. Aside from that one graffiti, and then we have 3 nails. All right. Now for this one, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the translation here. And this one came later. This you can see as time goes, we're getting a little bit later on here. The letters IHS is an abbreviation for the Latin phrase in hoc signo, which means in this conquer. In this you will conquer. Now there's a story behind this one, okay? And I want to see if maybe you might know the story. I suspect you might. Last year in 6th grade, did you guys study about Constantine?
Yes.
Roman general and eventual emperor? Okay, you definitely did. Does anyone remember the legendary story about Constantine and his great day that he had? He probably had several of them, but this might have been his greatest. See, Graham?
He saw like a cross in the sky, and
Mhm.
the soldiers looking at cross and the shield, and then he's on the battle.
Yeah? Yeah, so he was about to go into a battle. And, of course, at that time he was a pagan, all right? And he was actually going up against another Roman general. They were fighting for control of the city and the empire. And, yeah, you're right. He looked up in the sky and he saw something. Now, it's kind of come down to us that he saw a cross, but that's actually, if you look at the original account, it doesn't make it that clear. All right? But he saw something, and he claimed that he had heard a voice that said, "In this you will conquer." So Constantine took the image that he saw, he put it on all of the shields of his soldiers, and I got their armor, and they went into battle, and of course you know the rest is history. He won, and then he became emperor. Okay? So this idea that you will conquer with this symbol, all right? And Constantine, of course, decided to become a Christian, which was a pretty significant thing because now Christianity went from being a persecuted religion to now being promoted by the most powerful person in the empire. And that's when the church and the empire really kind of became teammates for quite a time, and the church began to grow even more. Now, just to kind of throw in a little bit to that story, I've looked at the accounts that we have about it, and some seem to imply that the real image that he would have seen was the key in the row. Because Constantine, when he became emperor, started utilizing the key row as kind of his symbol. We know from coins from his time, and there still are actual Roman coins that we still have today, the image of the key in the row became the most common image stamped on their money. Okay? So that seems to have been the image that he embraced. Okay? And then as time went on, the cross began to become more of a symbol as well. As I pointed out earlier, in the early church, the cross does not seem to have been a very common image. Okay? Not at all. Eventually it did, but not in the earliest centuries. In fact, in the early centuries, when Christians did make reference to the cross, they often used a letter T, okay, which would kind of be like a cross beam, on an upright post. So even when they did make references to the cross, it looked usually something more like that. Okay. Now, as time went on, eventually you would begin to see not only crosses, but you would see crucifixes used in Christian art. Now, can someone tell us the difference between a cross and a crucifix? Because there definitely is a difference. There definitely is a difference. See, Jordan?
A cross is just a cross. And
A cross is a cross.
And the crucifix is a cross with either like a figure of Jesus
Uh-huh.
or a picture.
Yes. Yeah, crucifixion is going to have Jesus' body on the cross. Okay? And of course, that's what we see on our crucifixes that we have in our classrooms. The crucifix is always portrayed in the sanctuary in every Catholic church. In fact, that's actually a requirement in the architecture of churches, is that the cross that you display so that everyone can see it is to have the body of Jesus on it. So you didn't start to see that until probably like medieval times, like 5th, 6th century, a couple hundred years after this. You do begin to actually see images of Jesus on the cross. But in the early centuries, like the time that we've been talking about here, you don't see images of Jesus very often. Okay, but of course crucifixes are so common now in our church tradition. Okay? All right, so those are just some very, very common images to represent Jesus. Most of them have lived on to the present day. So again, next time you're in church or somewhere and you see that, you should think of Jesus. Okay? Yes, sorry.
Are we ever going to study some that didn't live on to the current day?
Well, I would probably say the dolphin and the peacock. You're not going to see those images very often. Okay?
Yeah.
So maybe, I guess, to answer your question, we already have.
Yeah.
All right, not to say there aren't more, but those are just some I wanted to share with you. Okay. All right, now the other part of this article, which we're not going to do yet, is a list of some of the titles that Jesus is referred to as. And you can see in that box at the bottom of that page, there's a whole bunch of names. Now, don't worry, we're not going to talk about all of them. But tomorrow I'm going to take some from the list, and we're going to take a look at what they tell us about our belief in Jesus. Okay? But today we're focusing on the visual symbolism of Jesus. Okay? All right, so that covered our topic. I'm going to be giving to you an assignment now, which is going to take a little bit of what we talked about today, as well as a few things that we have already covered. Okay? So let me stop for a moment, and then we're going to get into this assignment.